Hello, Mariam. Thank you so much for being here with me, and welcome to our very first recorded conversations. I know that we've spoken so many times about this, but this is something that is very important, and more people should hear what our thoughts are about this. Um, I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. As you know, at Stampede, we believe in creating better worlds through thoughtful design and technology. I don't know whether you know it, but we finally came up with this wholesome belief actually after the work that we do with Viva Valet. And so because of that, the partnership that we have with Viva Valet has been so important to us. It is the exact exemplification of how this approach is collaborative and inclusive, and in together we are actually producing technology that genuinely empowers our users, and in this case, our older seniors. So let's start exploring by talking about something that has been at the back of everyone's mind but rarely verbalized. And how have we as a society have gotten so many things wrong about aging? I know that we talk about psychological toll on older adults due to technological exclusion. And how does Viva Valet and you yourself as the founder set out to change that? But also before that, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Shaza. And I also have learned a lot from our work together with Stampede. I'm Miriam, founder of Viva Valet, trusted services for seniors. And, we set out, Shaza, we felt we do have, I take care of my older husband. He's almost 93. So I felt that I had a very interesting and unique perspective as somebody that was 46 years younger, but living very much at the side of the older experience, right? And from a man from when he was 75, 76 to 93. So it's been interesting for me to watch how other people speak with him, interact with him, how he interacts with the world, and the impact that different tools have had on him, or the way of the changing tide of how work in general is done, right? Work or services or day to day. Everything from, I think when we first got married, and he's on the forefront of telecommunications, as you know. So I think when we first got married, it was the Nokia communicator, right? You remember that? Like that was elite technology, right? It was BlackBerry, Nokia communicator, where you could just send emails and even the text messaging, and then video calls became a thing with Motorola mostly. But then when the smartphone hit, right, that was a game changer. And I do have a lot to share about even the relationship with him and other older adults, even as they're passionate about technology. But to answer your question, I'm going to jump into your question. What are we getting horribly wrong? I don't know if it's that we're getting it wrong. I just don't think we are taught to consider, right, what the experience is actually like. So we are so busy going through our own experience. And I think one of the most profound experiences for us is actually having children and parenting, right? That forces us to be like, how do I want to do this? Because it's so impactful in another human's life. So there's all the books and all the stages of life, right? So from the moment you are conceived, there are names for what that baby is in your stomach, from embryo to like all the size of an avocado. I mean, you just went through it.
Yes.
Consume these what to expect when you're expecting enough. But and that those stages are all throughout, like, newborn, infant, toddler, crawler, whatever it is, right? All the way up until you're an adult. And then you're retired, right? You're a senior at like 55 or 60, and that's all you're called until you die.
Right.
There's really nothing in the space that's a forefront that's really talking about what that experience is, because it calls on older people. And what happens when you're older? People stop listening to you. You become inconsequential, because now the generation right behind you is in the prime of their life. They're making the maximum contribution. They're doing the maximum work. They're juggling their own children. So to the extent that it's not, I would say, wrong, we're just reaching the time period where older people have greater access to contribute and be independent and stay healthier longer and live on their own. And the work just hasn't been done yet, right? So we're just not prioritizing building relationships in our own individual lives with the oldest members of our community. We're just not doing that anymore.
Right. And as people who are working in technology and design, we certainly are not helping the situation, because we're designing for people like ourselves, and this creates this technological exclusion. And how does Viva Valley set out to change that?
Well, what we hope to do is, again, share the perspective of the older. So as you know, we don't want to design without them. And we didn't start out in this space, right? So we have the opportunity to kind of flip the script and set the foundation how we want to set it. And that's really how we wanted to set it, was let's keep asking the user. Let's keep making sure that we speak 90% to people that are in our customer market range and paid less attention to the 10%, and then keep questioning it, right? So I think a lot of that is in our philosophy of how we already work. And, not to the discredit of developers, but the way we all work now and the way we communicate is all through technology. It's all the social networks, right? You don't actually even have to see your friends anymore. You're texting them. Well, who are we leaving out there? Anybody without this type of access or ability, right? And that's just snowballing. But to think that everybody's going to catch up one day, so this is not going to be a problem, is ignorant. Because the older we get, the younger and more efficient and more advanced the technologies are. And we're also going to have a critical threshold we don't want to cross because it's too much work to learn a new technology. So this cycle is going to continue even when we're older.
Yeah. I love that thought, and I think that was the very first pitch that I heard from Viva Valley about how, in 2050 there will be at least 2 billion, the world population will hit 2 billion older citizens, that is above 65 years old. And that will be me. So when I count backwards, that will be me. And
Sip of coffee for that one, Shaza. That will be us.
yeah,
Be us, and at the same time, our parents.
correct.
So we're just trying to forge the way. And let me ask you, let me turn this to you. So you've done work now with Viva Valet, right? We've done it twice with Stampede, and you've got a front row seat on working with older adults. And we've done a lot of exchanges and collaborations. So what would you say are some of the key challenges that seniors mention when facing this?
Uh,
Technology that
yeah.
were that you didn't really consider before.
Uh, well, I mean, like, if I start listing them out, we're gonna be here all day. But I think if I were to think back, and one of the most surprising challenges that I discovered was it was an incredibly isolating experience for our older adults. But we thought that initially it was because, we are making we are in the business of making intuitive interfaces, but sometimes we don't realize that intuition differs depending on age groups. What we are very familiar with, what we have been exposed with, is not necessarily the same exposure that other people have. And what I've also realized is we are perpetuating this lack of confidence in older adults. We give them so many options and so many features that are not relevant to them, and we overwhelm them. And I think later on we're going to talk more about this, because there was a time in the Viva Valley product definition where we just decided, you know what, we're not going to give them the options because it's just so paralyzing for you to see this like list of options. It requires a lot of mental processing, and it's just not that important, you know and because I've seen firsthand how being excluded can impact self-esteem and confidence. I've seen how my mom, and I love telling this story to you, I see how my mom struggled with a feature on her smartphone. So I have a pre-Viva Valley and I have a post-Viva Valley experience. Yeah. And the pre-Viva Valley me was I stepped in and I took over her phone for her and I did it for her. I didn't guide her through it. I only later realized that I'm not instilling confidence in her to work with technology. But the post-Viva Valley me was, I was sitting, I moved my chair next to her. The next time that she asked me, how a certain feature worked, I moved my chair next to her. And then I let the phone be in the palms of her hands and I guided her step by step. So yay, Shaza and Shaza's mom.
Really congratulations, because that's extraordinary. It's really sit on your hands, right? It's sit on your hands. And I think that letting them repeat it. So that's really, really exciting. How do you guys as an organization really plan to address some of the things that you saw?
So I think what has been really interesting is because when we observe how the older adults use their phone, what struck me is there's a whole spectrum. There are some of them, and in some of the users that we have researched, they are so technologically savvy. They're far more savvy than me. They were setting their own Zooms, they were setting their own feed. I was so thoroughly impressed by them. But then there's also, on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who need a little bit more confidence, not because they don't know how to do it, it's because they have been convinced that they don't know how to do it. Um, so we need to introduce an experience that cater both sides of the spectrum. And on top of that, we also have to introduce a certain way for them to indicate what is their increasing level of confidence. And this is what I learned the most out of Viva Valet. You have to be able to meet the user where they are. Yeah. So you have to meet them when they feel a little bit less confident, but you also have to meet them when they start feeling more confident. And I think this is a very interesting avenue that we're looking at in our design process next.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. And we love to see the impact that we've had. It was wild for us as first-time developers to embark on this because, conceptually, we know things about building confidence in the olders. Conceptually, we knew, actually, very really, we knew that where this impact is coming from. It's from all the media portraying older people as dependent, right? Helpless, incapable of doing it, even in the imagery, like everyone's always being pushed in a wheelchair with a nurse. This impacts not only us, but them as well. So the minute they start to not know how to do something, their biggest fear is actually, does everybody think I'm that kind of older? Right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of the psychological thing we're trying to push through. That's very real. The older you get, it's like, I don't want to be seen as this. As one of those old people that can't take care of themselves. And that's what we dance upon a lot. So in building this app for the first time, my co-founder, Jen, and I, we really dove all in, right? We went straight to UX, and we realized that it wasn't something common because we know you hadn't dealt with startups, right? Because this is not really a process that a bootstrap startup is going to jump into. And we jumped in first into ethnography. And then right away, even before building the app, we were like, UI, UX, right? Let's figure out let's start with how we're going to make this technology really, really different. I'm curious what your thoughts were when you sat with us the first time and we had barely a business model canvas, multiple ideas of where we wanted to start, hadn't narrowed down our MVP, but already wanted to affect the type of technology that we wanted to put in front of our user. What was
Yeah.
that like?
What I distinctly remember was two things. Number one, you had over 30 over user personas. You already identified them. And that to me speaks of a certain level of maturity of understanding of your user. Which really checks my box whenever I speak to a first time client or a startup. But the second thing that you did was you also showed me the breadth of work you did through your own ethnography research. And that just blew my mind, um, because there's so much legwork being done, and all this legwork that you did in understanding the user then translated to this clarity of vision in Viva Valet. So I knew immediately it would be a powerful collaboration. I knew that we have shared goal, shared philosophy on how things should be. And and I also remember, I'm just describing what I remember. I
Sure.
remember there's this certain feeling of respectfulness, that you're not looking to aid, and you're actually not looking to push a certain, like a business model towards the user. That was not what you were doing. You wanted to empower them. You wanted them to feel confident using technology. And that is a bigger purpose than whatever, like at the ground level that we could be working on. So I think that was very clear to me. It has always been clear from day one that you didn't want to design without them. You didn't want to design for them. You want to design with them. And I think this clarity really resonated with us, because it's very empathy driven, it's very inclusive, and it's really aligned with our values in Stampede. So it was an easy yes from me.
I would agree. It wasn't easy. And I give a lot of credit to Jen. I mean, Jen really pushed the ethnography early. She comes from the healthcare space and the academic space and the research space. And while I believe in research as well, a lot of dealing with customers face to face, this was a very four steps back approach of just observing that without direction, which really we learned a lot beyond just their relationship with technology, right? We learned a lot about what motivated them, what they were afraid, what they wanted to hold on to, which really helped inform, again, the business that we brought forth.
Yeah. And what I really love about the process was how it was really a three-way co-designing, I call it. So there was Stampede with our insights and experience, and then we're designing with you who are very passionate at Viva Valley, and then we're also designing with our wonderful enthusiastic users, and I cannot underline the word enthusiastic enough. They said yes, like they said yes to us, like having to do this after their dinner time, for example, having to do user research, interviewing them. They said yes when, after we concluded the interview questions and we asked them, would you like to test this prototype in maybe 2 weeks' time? They said yes. So they're very enthusiastic, and that is such a heartwarming experience for me. But what about on your side? What has been the collaborative experience like for Viva Valley?
Wow. So, I mean, obviously collaborating with Stampede and you, especially at the helm of that, has been an education, right? So we really had to learn the nuances of UI and UX. And I will tell you, we carry that through to our development team. And we realize how little, I mean, I imagine your struggle even still dealing with developers all the time because they're just not paying attention to the user, right? So we did feel very aligned with Stampede, and we learned a lot through the design sprint and the initial design sprint, and what it was that we were actually looking for from the user. I think initially we thought we're kind of pre-developing an app, and instead what we were actually doing was addressing how the user was making decisions, right? And I think for me that was extremely insightful, and I think we go into a little bit later how that impacted our business model and how we chose to actually create the MVP and then continue to move forward. So you guys were extraordinarily great listeners, and I think that was really important for us, for you to hear our vision, for you to understand that we weren't actually in the market yet, right? We didn't actually have users yet. So we were asking people and developing something for a user we did not already have, a business that was not yet developed, but we still wanted to get the interface right? That was, we wanted to start there as part of our ethos, and that was a challenge, but y'all rose to the challenge and really walked hand in hand with us and gave us such a body of work that we were able, even to this day, to kind of carry on and educate developers. And again, as new to technology and the development space, I think that speaks volumes to the impact that Stampede has had on us when we are able as a company to impact developers along the way.
Let me try this now. Does it work?
Oh,
Yay!
now you're just showing off. Okay, I'm just showing off.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's a mutual appreciation that I have and my team have on our side. What you probably did not know was when I first introduced, so for the very first, I think first few meetings, it was you and me and Jen. But then after that, when work started and I have to introduce a team, actually the very first thing that we had in conversation before that meeting was the question of what was your experience with an older adult in your life? And how does that experience translate into the work that you're about to do and embark on with Viva Ballet? So we asked everyone on the team this, and they all came back with their own very personal experience, and that became their introduction to you in that meeting. And I think that was such a strong, powerful, I still have goosebumps. It was such a strong and powerful statement of purpose that everybody carried into the project. I can easily say, we have worked on a lot, with many other organizations, but it's Viva Valley and its accessibility and its designing for all the adults that continues to be at the undercurrent of whatever that we do. And I have to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Listen, again, we learned a lot. We take that same tool with us. You know, we did it with the developers. Every time we run into a hiccup, I call everybody. I say, call everybody that's developing, like, you know, whether we've subcontracted out a module or not. And I sit them all around. And the question I actually ask now is, who's the oldest person you know? And you'd be shocked to hear sometimes the answer is like, my grandparent, and they're 62. Ha! What? Right? But I mean, that's the reality of it. And it's not intentionally ignoring olders. Olders aren't actually in their life sphere,
Mm,
right? We're not living multi-generationally the way that we did before. So how can you expect to consider somebody who's not actually in consideration?
exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes we actually have to do field work. We're like, all right, we take the developers and do a field trip to a place where there's olders, and we do games or interactions so they can kind of, again, understand with empathy and use their same creativity to really understand the problem that we're trying to solve for, right?
Yep. So, so that brings us actually into so what happened throughout the process. So we know that we have been clear in one thing: our users' voices to be genuinely heard, and we want them to inform our decisions throughout the design process. So we were very clear about that. Um, let's see how we unpack this into, how we use research, your ethnography, the users interviews that we did. How did it guide our research iteration and the overall strategy of Viva Valley? So far we have talked about how technology can create isolation and exclusion. So it can alienate, but it can also include. But I feel like throughout the design process, I feel like speaking from the research that I've observed, the technology does have its unifying factor. And I think research for Viva Valley to me was particularly unique because the users, the founding team, the design team were all distributed. We have Jen in Switzerland, we have you and me here. And at that time, I think you were in Australia. And then we have the users in America. And we were fortunate to have such understanding users. They gave us their space and time to understand them better. But in researching and understanding their worlds, there were so many considerations, Mariam. If you remember, it was time zone differences, logistics, cultural adjustments, which I'm still learning today because the way that I speak to my older adults, it's quite different because Asians we have a very, and especially Malaysians, we have very high power distance, and there's a certain power distance between you and your grandparents, your parents. But we want to make this experience as realistic and natural as possible for the users. So if you were looking back at that research process and it was remote, what were your biggest takeaways from that?
Well, it was challenging. It was challenging to say the least. And, you know, to be able to be in a room, I think what I didn't want to have lost in this process was to watch somebody through a screen interact with their technology is very different than standing over their shoulder, which is why I really did insist that even though our users and our customer base that we were trying to solve for were US based at the time, I did feel that their being older in general is not country or ethnic specific. So it was nice that we did have the one hands-on opportunity to actually look over the shoulder and see the movements of, you know, when someone's frustrated, what do? They just always go back to the home screen, right away. Like they start over and start this process. And I think that's just really little things like that are really fascinating to see. I think one of the funniest moments for me was us not understanding that when you develop in the sprints, right? We do the user interviews and the research, and then we sprint and then we go back to them. I didn't realize it was such a short window, or we would have advised that older people are busy. Right. I think we didn't realize that we had to share even that knowledge that we had, that you need to book an older person out 2 or 3 weeks in advance too. Just because they're maybe retired from a working career profession does not by any stretch of the imagination mean that their day is free, or they're not on holiday, or they don't have commitments that they want to do.
Yeah.
So that to me was, again, user experience in a way that is meaningful and impactful, right? of really understanding an older person. Our research body has been so widespread, right? Since from putting cameras in people's homes and really understanding their relationship with their children, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with their spouse, the activities that they have to do. And I think that, you know, I think the skills we all walked away from are extremely unique and extraordinary and are going to allow us to do these things in more countries without actually having to be on the ground. It's actually going to be able to scale our efforts in UX and UI and developing out for different geographies. You know, you think India or South, now all of a sudden that's available to us, Shaza, to Viva Valet and Stampede, because we now know actually how to tackle it and get very real feedback on UX interviews for olders, right? And testing without actually having to be present.
Right.
And that's powerful. That's really powerful. And I don't really know how many other companies have actually been able to tackle that. Right? Most of them get very hyper local. And what happens when you do that? You're really thinking Silicon Valley.
Correct.
Right? You're really thinking that Apple is testing and they do an extraordinary job, but they have to do what's in reach because they think that, oh, let me just do who's here. Helpful, but also actually you can do it worldwide. And we did that sprint. I was in Australia. I caught COVID. I remember, because now we were facing a few 8 hour, and we wanted an 8 hour sprint, right? For 5 days. So it was you guys in Malaysia, our users in throughout the US. We've got people in Switzerland. You know, it was wild. I
That's
think
wild.
Philippines and Marie in the Philippines. So if we could, we actually span the time zones. So if we could do that, we know that we could do it anywhere, right?
Yeah.
At any time. And that's liberating to know. It's really powerful.
We really do cover, you know, like the entire breadth of the world time zone when we did that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me ask you this. What did you find the most challenging about doing the design sprint where we were using older adults?
So I think my team was experienced in, you know, running remote design sprints. So before COVID, we ran a lot of physical design sprints. But because of COVID, you know, we started doing a lot of remote design sprints, and that also includes people from all over the world. So our sprint team included people from Colombia, from Denmark, from Australia, and similarly, the users were also distributed. But what was especially interesting about Viva Valet was the fact that we had to really stretch our capabilities, Mariam, and we have never, you know, like think of running a remote design sprint. So the remote design sprint itself was great, but it was actually the usability testing at the end that was really forcing us in a good way to creatively think, how can we get this application in the hands of our user without being there? And not just that, we have to think about logistics. You know, how do we see what they're tapping on the screen? How do we set up? You know, how do we almost being, you know, that person behind watching over behind their shoulder without actually physically being there? I think that was one of the most memorable remote usability testing I've ever been a part of. And I think because it was double challenging, because we wanted to create an environment, a virtual environment where the older users will feel empowered but not overwhelmed. That was a tall order.
It
And
takes time. It takes time, doesn't it? And I
yeah,
will say, to your credit, I have an extraordinary amount of self-awareness, and I know I wouldn't back down. Like my ability to advocate for the user, like you're like, can we do this? And I said no. Can we maybe do like this? And I was like, no, we still want to do it the way that we're going to do it. We just need to keep figuring out a way. And we did in the end.
right, right,
So
right.
we approached it until we could get it right and not have to make any sacrifices because they were older.
Right, right. So what I take away from that is, in a way, we learn that just because we haven't done it before, it doesn't mean it cannot be done. Right? So we were putting all these sort of constraints, you know, but what will it affect the research integrity if we do it this way? Will it make the user feel uncomfortable? We were actually really, you know, typical, you know, the Asian person that I am, I was worried about how the user might be feeling if we do this. Actually, they were okay. They were more than happy to give it a try. And I was in a way like my own biases was thinking like surely they didn't want to try this. And I think that that experience proved me wrong and I love it. What I learned also is about terminology. So we kind of take for granted things like font size. We expect people to understand what font size means because we understand it. But we didn't account that not all of our users have been in the graphic design industry, for example. They may not, because they're just so limited accessibility options, they are not familiar with the term font size. But you could say like, do you want us to increase the text to be larger or do you want it to be smaller? That is a more natural language that they would understand. Um, I think another consideration, special consideration that we have for that design sprint was we were asking ourselves, how could we coordinate this session across multiple time zones while we are accommodating varying energy levels?
Yes.
That required meticulous planning. Like we could either interview the users very early in the morning or sometime around their dinner time. So we have to be very respectful and considerate. Um, we also organize and schedule segments and breaks throughout each test so that we can help them avoid fatigue. But also at the same time, we don't want them to feel like, in any way that we're patronizing, that we're condescending. So we have to be very mindful with the tone of how we're asking these questions. I'm still learning on that end. And I'm always catching myself like, okay, so you want to hit just the right tone at giving them the option, but at the same time, you're not insinuating anything else. And I think that is my learning journey.
You
What
know, to
Yeah.
the extent that it can help, Shaza, in that regard, I can simplify that for you. So you don't have to so you don't have to overthink it. It's not even about hitting a tone. It's about leveling the playing field. So it's about putting the problem at hand at the table equally for both of you, saying this is hard, right? We're managing time zones, it's equally hard for you as it is for them, right? It's not additionally necessarily hard for them. That would be making an assumption, right? So to the extent that this entire process is new, and addressing it like that, say, hey, this process is new and it's challenging for all of us, so we might check in from time to time to see if any of us need breaks, not specifically for that person, because that's
Right.
actually the truth. It's taking the burden of a different behavior off the back of the older, that they are unique or that they need special consideration, right? It's the situation that might call for any individual human,
Mm.
anybody involved, to maybe need a break, go to the bathroom. That's not a unique older experience, isn't it?
Exactly,
So
exactly.
that we can just level the experience field like that, I
Yeah.
think is the easiest way to think about, and a little bit less maybe about tone. Even though I know we did have a tone conversation. That was the first time where I remember we had to have an elder speak talk.
Yes.
To say, hey, maybe, in some role playing, to say, we know everybody's speaking to their elders out of respect, but this is how it can be perceived, right?
Okay. So what I love about that, I'm going to touch about that later on when we cover technology, was how that became the inspiration on how we use AI in
Oh,
Stampede right now, and how we stop ourselves from injecting our biases into how we speak when we're doing user interviews. So I'm going to talk more about that. I was so excited to share that with you. Now, just to wrap up about the design sprint, so there are challenges, but what I ultimately love about this is I love how short we made the feedback loop take. Like, it only took us 5 days for us to find out what the user thinks about something that we built from zero. And and after that 5 days, we were able to then refine the user experience based on the valuable feedback that they gave us. And then we are able to make it more intuitive. You were able to make decisions like, you know what, instead of actually giving them these options, I'm going to remove the options entirely because it's not important and necessary. And and it's so rewarding to see that speed, but also how many thoughts actually go into creating that speed. It's almost like, so there's a saying that says we have to slow down to speed up. And I felt like that research, the ethnography that you did was the slowing down. But the moment we hit the road, we were just like bam, 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 bam. And I love seeing that kind of energy that is really fueled by so much thoughts and all the legwork that you have done. Yeah.
Shaza, thank you for that. it was the same for us too. We made a lot of changes to what our assumptions were. And I think the difference about our philosophy is when we put the customer at the forefront and we say, okay, we're going to build a business not based on our assumptions, right? We have them, but the minute that the user is going to give us direction, we're going to take it. And what became very clear through that model that we took away was, one, that we couldn't be a marketplace, right? We couldn't give choices between, so we already knew we weren't going to be a service provider. We just wanted to aggregate the services. But we
Yeah.
realized we realized a couple things through ethnography, right? We realized through ethnography that fierce independence and empowerment was really, and autonomy was the commodity. Like that's really the commodity for an older adult. So to the extent that we can always put them in the forefront of their own decisions and keep the right to self-determination with them and their choices, we were going to honor that. And their relationship with their children is their business, right? So that was really powerful for us to understand as a big takeaway, that they could do a lot of the things and we didn't want to take that away from them, but how could we support in certain areas? And you know that we had a lot of ideas, and we still do, in our product backlog, but we had to start with a few. When we got to the sprint, through that, we learned a couple of things that informed our business model. One was that reduced decision making. So it was about trust. They wanted to make the one decision to use Viva Valet. Then they wanted us to already know the cleaner. They wanted to already trust that the cleaner was going to be good, or the handyman was going to be good, or the meals were going to be great. The minute we put a choice in front of them, it was, then what value are we adding? Right? We're just keep giving them options and choices. And that wasn't a value proposition. So when we attempted ease of use through technology, it wasn't just, is the button easy to use, is the decision easy to make?
Yes.
And every time in that sprint, we saw that there was a hesitation in a decision, we removed it.
Yep.
We removed it, right? And we were like, you know what? Then it stopped being easy. Okay, so how do we go back to ease of use? Right? So it wasn't just about button placement or whatever. It was about the decision-making process. How many decisions when you're choosing, to clean your home? Well, nobody wants to choose between this cleaner and that cleaner. Why? Not just because it's fatiguing, but also you don't want to make the wrong choice.
Yes.
And the older you get, that psychology is more impactful, right? So there is making a decision and not making a decision, and not making a decision becomes more attractive because you know you're not going to make the wrong one. Correct. So we decided that, we wanted to keep with ease of use as our primary value proposition. And with that came trust. So now they were trusting us to do this. And we thought, we need to vet properly. So our 7-step vetting process was a direct result of the sprint, where now everybody had to have business insurance, highly rated, business licensing. We had to try them out. And then we also realized that we wanted to train them. What we learned through that design sprint with you was that every service partner that interacts with our olders needs a Viva Valet education. They need an education. And so now every service partner goes through 2 hours of training with Jen, right? We have modules of service with understanding. So we make sure that the way that we believe that olders deserve to be treated is how everybody in our ecosystem treats them, from our developers and our designers to the cleaner for the house, right? To the chef that prepares the meals, to the person that delivers them. Like even in meal delivery, they have to print out larger instructions, right?
Yes.
And they have to go in the house and they have to put them away properly. They can't just leave them at the door. So a lot of considerations about that last mile of the service is really important, that high touch area. And then finally, and probably the most expensive and impactful decision that we made, was we had to get hyper local. This wasn't going to be a situation where we originally thought that we could build a aggregated technology and then embed, Uber and a nationwide meal service and nationwide cleaners, and then just let it autopilot. We needed to get hyper local, and we wanted to build trust, and we wanted the people to be within the community. So they felt like they were being looked after from within their own community. And that was really important to us. And that was also informed by the same trust decision. How are we going to build trust? We're going to build it by being from within the community.
Right. I remember distinctly in one of the usability testing session that we had, the user was commenting like, if you give me two options, and one is a national level service, and the second is a hyper local community service, family business, I would choose family business.
Yes.
Yes.
And that mattered to us. Like that input mattered to us because we also knew when we do our gut check about what would we put in our parents' home and what would we want for our grandparents, right? And this is part of our brand values. The same was true for us, right? Something might be efficient and cheaper, but is that really how the level of care that I want to give? And the answer was no.
Yep.
So is it expensive to get hyperlocal? Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. But we did it, and we're really proud of the work that we're doing. Yeah, and it's the service providers love it too. So it's been a wild journey, and it started there. So happy to be with that process with you guys and have you guys have those things revealed throughout the process. And
Yeah.
it's nice enough to be a startup and be agile enough and be the founders and the funders to be able to make those decisions on the spot.
Exactly. Love it.
Yeah, I'm gonna move through to the design process, which is really exciting for us because this is something that we learned a lot about and are continuing to learn about, right? Like we're not experts in this space. Although we were invited to the UN Council, I think I told you on this to really speak about the technology in this space. So that was really exciting. We give a lot of credit to Stampede for giving us somewhat of an education about how to be articulate and know what we're talking about.
Afforded.
Yeah.
Afforded.
You've worked with us now twice.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear how that's informed your approach. Yeah, to olders in general, in your personal life, in the working life, and maybe even outside olders, like just different pockets of accessible groups for you and your team.
So personally, well, on both sides, it has been profoundly actually impactful. On a personal level, I've shared with you, the pre Viva Valley me and the post Viva Valley me, and it deepened my empathy and an understanding of their unique challenges. And I've seen how enthusiastic, yet you use the word, at the moment when we see people hesitated, we remove, that decision making stress or pressure from them. So I've seen how they're enthusiastic, but they're also hesitant about technology, and it reminds me of my own mother's struggle. So I learned that empowering rather than assisting was actually key to maintain their confidence and autonomy. So that is on the personal side. Professionally, it impacts Stampede in two ways. First, it reinforces our belief on the importance of co-creation. So we're co-creating with you, but we're also co-creating with the user. And it shows us and it corrects our belief that older adults are, like very one-dimensional. Now we know they're so diverse as any demographic, and they must be approached with nuance and not just broad assumptions. We use empathy mapping for this. We use better and more inclusive language and terminology, and we shorten the feedback loop. So we don't wait for months before we hear back what the user think about a certain decision, but we do it in 5 days. So this has allowed us to create intuitive interface that reflect their preferences and also be very considerate with their challenges. Now, the second part that I've seen this change the way that we do work at Stampede is it changed the way we look at accessibility. So we've always placed great significance to accessibility because we have done work for countries where accessibility is a primary and also legal requirement. But we're now more intentional. Our design and development team, we're more intentional about balancing that simplicity and that accessibility, but also with depth. Because what we don't want to do is we want to avoid either oversimplifying, or we also want to avoid overwhelming them. Because if you go to some accessibility options, there are just so many options there that even the accessibility options could overwhelm the user.
Yeah, it's clear that they're designed for somebody else to complete.
Exactly. Yes.
Which
Yes.
is not terribly empowering, is it?
No, and what's also interesting is, those accessibility options are done in such small fonts. So, so you wonder, like, in the first place, who's
Oh,
to use
Shaza.
this?
Oh, Shaza. Exactly. And they really are like sight, sound.
Correct. Yep.
I think I nailed, that's it.
That's all. Just to,
They're,
yeah.
they're all a combination of really sight and sound. And that's not, you know, to the extent that we're talking about aging or different stages in life, everything doesn't deteriorate at the same time with the same intensity, right? So sometimes it's slowing down the decisions or separating out the decisions. In a decision tree with technology, which is really what our easy mode does. It doesn't make things bigger, right? It breaks up multiple decisions intuitively to go one by one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you feel very confident that, did I do what they're asking me to do? So the questions become more clear and the answers become more specific. So the opportunity to think that you're not answering it properly reduces, right? There's less of those opportunities for gray area. And then the confidence level of the user to move through that decision increases, because the critical component of something being easy doesn't necessarily mean fast. It doesn't mean fast for
Yep.
olders,
Yep.
right? It means clear and
I
confident.
I agree. And this is something that you have also done in Viva Valley, right? You are considering, and we have actually tested this, the easy mode and the fast mode. And what were your learnings from that important feature that you brought to the product because of something that you learned from a usability test?
I think well, it was interesting that we called it easy and fast, not easy and hard. So even in our language, we're really talking about it. What we learned is everybody prefers easy mode,
Yes.
right? But what we learned is that a lot of developers do things because it's the status quo, right?
Mm,
It's a template, if you will. It's never really been challenged. Little things like back arrows or home buttons, or that doesn't mean anything to somebody who's not constantly on their phone or has not been brought up with technology. The words sometimes don't even make sense, right? So we've learned a lot about how even simple language can be really impactful. I will tell you, the one thing that we learned that blew our mind was, without question, when you book a service, you need to schedule the service. Okay. And in going through this process, we realized that, why are we asking them what day they want the service without telling them what day it is today? And it came to me in a moment where I recall every single time I'm trying to book something, I have to like zero out of the app, go to my calendar and be like, okay, well, today is Tuesday, the 16th, and then go back and schedule it. Because, because everybody assumes you just know what day it is. And I realized that even for me at 47, I'm always doing that. Like, it's not that hard to just say today is, and then ask the question.
yep.
So it was something that it was as simple as that, that like, it's so intuitive, but it's so overlooked. And it's such an easy part of the user experience, right? That helps you make that decision. So I think what we've learned is that it's not actually an older, not older proposition. It's an easier and faster
Yes.
proposition.
Yes.
Right.
And I remember mentioning this to you, like, hey, you know what? I think you have just created a really elegant way of testing whether a user starts feeling more confident or not with this feature. Because when they first started, almost all of them go with easy. But then, if they feel like, okay, I can do this, what about fast? Can I try, like, should I try fast now, because I feel like this was too easy for me? So I think that shows an elevated sense of confidence, and I think we should really start measuring how many of our older adults user actually made the switch after
Oh, I
first
love
session of, yeah.
We will. I'll take notes of that, and we'll track it and let you know. And the other thing is, we always default to easy mode. We make that the baseline of assumption is the bigger accessibility features. We don't start with the smallest font. We don't start with, fast mode. We really break it apart like that, because we, again, fundamentally believe that there's a saying that we use here, and it's kind of what you were speaking about with empowering your mother. And the anecdote that we use at Viva Valet is, don't help the old lady across the street. And that sounds really counter everything we've been taught, which is help the old lady cross the street,
Yep.
right? But what we believe is you don't know that lady's journey. And if she's carrying groceries and she's looking like she's struggling, that might be the one activity that she does in her day that reminds her that she can live alone, that she can take care of herself. And
Yeah.
if you just swoop in and grab the bag, you might have robbed her of the one thing that reminds her that she can do it. Now, we're not saying blow past her and ignore her. You can walk with her. You can ask her. You can make sure that the cars stop in the crosswalk. You can do those things with allowing her to continue the journey that she was on and not, robbing her of that journey. And I'm guilty of that too, Shaza, with my husband. Guilty. I've had to catch myself also of
Right.
doing.
Right.
I think of a night where I usually get him a hot drink at night, and it's more of a, oh, I'm a good wife, and like I get these things for him, and and one night I think I was on a call and I see him come into the kitchen, and all I'm hearing myself is, shoot, I didn't do this for him, right? Failing, failing, failing as a wife. And he goes and he gets it, and I quickly get off my call. Now he's made the tea and he's walking back to the room. And what do I want to do? I want to grab it from him and go put it by his bedside, right? And I stopped myself because I realized he's like at the finish line of a task that he normally doesn't do for himself because I do it. But he's come all this way. And in my sense of guilt, I want to fix that for myself, nothing to do with him.
Exactly.
Nothing to do with him. I want to feel good about myself. And so I want to take it from him and go help him in this last leg. And it's the worst thing I could have done. Right? Because him completing that for himself is what's empowering.
Right. Right.
So
Well, I do feel that, what I take away from that is the fact that we are now able to catch ourselves. And I think that is very important. Like before this, we would just do it without giving it a second thought. But now we're becoming more aware, and we're going to get better, Mariam, in time.
we're gonna get better.
We're gonna get better.
It's a process.
And one thing that now we're moving towards the technology, and I think one thing that that has also inspired me about Viva Valet is you don't want to do this alone. Like you don't want to be the only player in this space. You have always believed in let's encourage more people to look into this. Let's collaborate more. We're not looking at competition, we're not looking at comparison, we're looking at collaboration. And one of the ways that you're working on this is by creating like almost like a design playbook. And early on in this conversation, you mentioned that you were looking for ways where we can inform other people what is the best approach or what are the best practices when it comes to interviewing or doing user research for an older adult. So what are your hopes in making this guideline accessible to others?
Oh, I love this. And you're right. We don't really look at competition, I think, in the same way. This space is so vast that unless a significant amount of us are working at this together, we're not going to move anything, quite frankly. Right. So it's going to take a lot of people. My dream, our hopes at Viva Valet is to be able to create a body of work that other people can contribute to as well. Right. Whether we can have competitions, like we would love an open platform of sharing. So it's, imagine a guideline where other, UX and UI designers or developers that stumble across something can get credit and be like, this is what we're doing, and not gatekeep. Right? I feel like our future and our ability to be independent and autonomous and use technology is far too precious and valuable. And our ability to even contribute at a later age in life is going to take all of us not gatekeeping.
I agree.
That's what we know. And perhaps Viva Valet and Stampede can do this together. We can put out a body of work and we can invite other people to continue to add to different components of it. And it can still just be out there as a living, working body of work, internationally, that can keep moving in this direction. So I'm going to throw the gauntlet down and say, let's do this, Shaza. I mean it. Let's do this. We'll put our hands up first, and we'll create this platform for collaboration. And I think that it can't be done soon enough, and it can't be done without more and more people.
Yeah. There are existing guidelines out there, by IBM, by many of the more major corporation, but I feel like they sometimes, the experience of the user can get lost in translation there because they're really dedicated. Like the primary audience would be technologists. as a designer, I have to actually go through like a lot of these publications just to prepare myself mentally in order to start working with older adults as our user. And Mariam, one thing that I read the Viva Valley blog. So one of the things that you mentioned that was really, really interesting to me was you said that this non-inclusive technology, that as a result of our ignorance, as a result of us almost like not, it's uncomfortable to think about aging. It's just uncomfortable for most young people to think about aging because they're not there yet, even though, and then the experience that they see in their parents, in their grandparents, can be also create a form of isolation and lack of, I wouldn't say lack of empathy, but you're sometimes, like in my when I see my older parents and also my grandparents, is sometimes the articulation and the sharing of the experience is not intentional. So you kind of have this filter where you're observing, but you're not necessarily understanding. So this can then becomes, non-inclusive technology, because obviously, the younger people are the people responsible for creating this technology, but this creates a digital divide. And you also say in your blog that it's not just an issue of access, but it's also an issue of equity and dignity. What do you mean by that?
So as we use more and more technologies to do everyday things, right? If you think about it, if you think about news today, even just access to information today versus how it was when we were small children, versus how our parents were when they were small children. It used to be you just get the news in your environment. Now you have worldwide news and it feels like everybody's getting murdered in your backyard, right? So there's good and there's bad. But in order to get that news, there's more technology. So even watching TV is not what it used to be. You can't just turn on the TV and watch it, right? Now there's a box and you have to know how to manipulate the box. You need to know how to subscribe to whatever you're subscribing. And that's all online. You can't just pick up the phone and call these internet companies and try to get them on the phone, and certainly not try to get them to help you.
Mm.
So the dignity in them even trying to call and have like tech support with somebody who's younger, it's not kind, right? It's not forward thinking. It's not inclusive. And even though us in this generation where it feels very efficient and we love all this access, and people that are younger than us, it feels automatic. The burden's actually now on us to manage that for our parents as well, right?
Yes.
So again, they feel more dependent on us sooner than they need to, because we have changed the way we do things and we're making it all technology based. So
Mm.
where before, somebody who was 80 years old could pick up who didn't have a car, didn't have access to rides, could either call their neighbor, right? Because it's how you did things, or they could call a taxi cab company, right?
Yep.
Now they have to try to book an Uber, or else it's really expensive. And if
Mm.
they can't, now they have to call somebody to do that for them, or they have to choose not to go, right? And so even though these technologies that are super disruptive and arguably extraordinary, right? They open up parts of the economy, they open up work for people. So I'm not trying to downplay them at all, but they are significantly trapping, and that's what I'm going to call it. They're trapping older adults. And this is not going to change as we get older unless we all, as youngers, start to actively participate in it.
Mm.
Right? If we think about, and I don't think this is a charity, but when you think about savings, like you're earning money and you put money away for your retirement. All of us that are in professions right now need to be putting thought into our aging journey, because we're going to land there. And let me tell you who's not going to think of us: our kids, their
Yeah.
kids, and their kids in their profession, right? And we're going to be exhausted. So
Yes.
we're going to be faced with this too. And we're going to also feel like we can't do something that we should have been able to do.
Right. I love how, now I'm thinking of Viva Valley, like this is actually my retirement fund,
Yes, please contribute. Thank you.
my experience retirement fund. Okay.
So if we can, and look, and the technology is out there, the knowledge is out there, the passion is out there. We just need to align it so everybody's developing for a space, and it's going to really open up our own ability to do things as we age,
Mm.
right? We keep making the assumption that if we already know how to Zoom now, then we'll be able to do it at night. That's a wild assumption. It's like somebody saying, well, I already know how to pick up the phone now and use the telephone and watch TV. I'm not going to have any problem in the future, except for we don't use those things anymore.
Right. Exactly.
right? We don't use them anymore. It is really, really wild to think about. Um, Shaza, I wanted to ask you, after going through this process, what accessible means to you,
Mm.
right? I know you talked a little bit about it, and before we move on to more talk about AI and things like that, like how is your approach? We know people are building a lot of things, and we're confronted with these a lot. So we're building a symptom tracker, and everyone's like, oh, you can connect this and the steps and this and this and this, the medical devices.
Yep.
After working with us, what are your thoughts about these things? Because I have very, very specific thoughts on this, and I'm curious what yours are.
So I think when you talk about accessible and integrated technology, and you mentioned medical devices. So those devices aspire to enhance the daily living and health management of older adults. So they can be wearable monitors that track vital signs, or like you said, a symptom tracker. And I would also imagine that they connect older adults with their healthcare providers virtually, from the comfort of their own home. But I've actually done some work in this space for a group of hospitals in Malacca, Johor, and also Singapore. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to introduce a service where older adults could schedule the appointments with their healthcare provider, not for the first appointment, but for follow-up appointments. Um, but what we've also realized in that research is many of these devices often fall short in terms of user-friendly design. Example, like, you have complicated interfaces, you have small buttons, confusing instructions, and then there's also the lack of consideration for physical limitations that some older adults might face. And I actually had this experience in Viva Valley itself, where we were interviewing one user, and he is so tech savvy. And yet one thing that he said that would stop him from asking for help, on any digital platform that he uses, is the fact that you don't offer real-time voice chat.
Yeah.
And this is so important because to us, we see, like, we don't do voice. Like, if somebody calls you on your phone, you have some form of anxiety now for some reason, right? You prefer to text. But when somebody needs help and an older adult needs help, typing is a struggle. It can be a struggle. It depends on their physical limitation, like you said. Like, the aging does not happen equally for everyone. So perhaps, your eyesight is still great, but you start having difficulty, typing, and then, you see the size of keyboards on your smartphones. It's really obnoxious. And so they prefer to have real-time voice chat, but that's if you go to Grab right now, you actually don't have that choice. And the interesting thing about this was recently I gave a talk at Ørsted. So Ørsted is a green energy company based in Denmark, but they have an office here in KL. So I gave a talk at their AI day. And even though it's a thought that I give to technologists, engineers, the one unifying topic that we all could agree on was how difficult it is to use Grab by our parents. Like, our parents don't use Grab naturally. And I don't know how many people think that.
Grab is the opposite of few choices.
Correct.
Right. So for example, if Grab was just like Grab for olders rides only, and they only isolated rides, for example,
Yep.
Grab, shout out to Grab, love your app, but maybe just consider.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that's the thing, like, you can have all these the notion of the product is good, but without involvement, without actually physically viewing how your users use this, you wouldn't really catch on all these small details that will help make it very intuitive and easy for them. So I think what you can do is, obviously, do what we have already done, do what Viva Valley has already been doing, involve older adults in the design process. Like, you should involve them early. In fact, before you even think about your tech stack, do your user stack. Like, have a complete understanding of your user and have a direct engagement with the user. You can read publications, you can read journals about it, but nothing really prepares you for the direct exposure to how older people are using technology. Second is, don't go for more features. Like, don't create more hesitation points, like you said, right? So simplify the user
Create an easy mode with the critical
interface.
features. Like, not older people aren't going to be graphing their stuff. And like the doctor might, great, but maybe they don't need all that noise in that space.
Exactly. Yeah. So on top of being easy to use, you should make it easy for them to decide. And Mariam, this is actually what you said just now. Like at the point when they don't need to make decision, why force this just so that you have a little bit more information? So it's not necessary. And lastly, opt for when if you're making an integrated accessible device for older adults, consider having easy to access tutorials because they can learn on their own. We have repeatedly found through our user research that they want to learn. They have the capability to learn, they have the interest to learn, but we're not making it easy for them to learn. And also offer real-time help options like a voice chat, because that will make a significant difference in how they can adapt, embrace these technologies, and feel more confident using it. So I think it's regardless of whether it's a physical product or it's a digital application, the principles will remain the same.
I agree. I agree. And to the extent that I have, as you know, again, my husband's 93, so we have all the devices. I have a journal length of commentary for any company that's interested, really. But I do think that, and I'll give a shout out to one of my favorites. So Abbott does have a Libra sensor. It's for diabetes, and it's just the sensor, and there's a corresponding app. They do a really good job of when you open the app, if you're on the right spot in it, the number's really big and it's color coded. So you know if you're in the even if you can't see the number at some point, but you're in the habit of doing this, you know if you're in the danger zone or in the green zone or the yellow zone, and the number is humongous. So my husband, who had a stroke in December, whose eyesight is affected, this is still the one app on his phone that he can use,
Yes.
right? Because he can differentiate between, I mean, obviously I put it on the bottom bar of his iPhone, right? So I guided him because he has a gazillion apps to the critical apps that he can use, but this is a really impactful one. And I think the companies have to ask themselves when it comes to the older user, like, what are the three critical objectives for the user? The company often has objectives because they might be selling the data, right? They might be as secondary sources of revenue. We get all this, but it cannot overpower the critical use of the user that's bought and is using this technology for that reason, right? So even something that's really simple that we're doing in our app design is the idea of the pinch and grow.
Yes.
Not every app allows you to do that, but most people that have some vision impairment, they have already learned on their iPhone that they can do this, right?
Yep.
Why doesn't every app like allow for the user to do that, go back down and push it? It's not actually that hard to develop, just nobody's thinking about how easy their own in-app can be,
Yep.
right? But I agree with you. I think to the extent that older people like want the actual medical data. As you know, Viva Valet, when we first talked, symptom tracker was one of the two things that we were deciding to develop out first. We have since developed the symptom tracker, and I'd love to show it to you. But this is a pictorial representation of how you're feeling. So these are the kind of inputs that no medical device can give you. So how is your knee pain? Is it better than yesterday? Worse than yesterday? Is it the same? Is it gone? It doesn't actually matter if it's a 10 or a 9 because that's harder to remember and track, but if it still hurts, right? And then you can just touch the button. It's a two-tap system, like the part in the ailment. So are you vomiting? Do you just feel unwell? Do you have chest pain? Where is it? And it's just by tapping images and photos. Like there's not actual any type in data. But what that allows a user to do is after 2 months, and they're going to the doctor and the doctor's like, how you feeling? And they're like, great. But they're not. They just can't remember what all their symptoms were. And some of them can be concerning, right? Like maybe you don't remember that you've had blood in your urine for 2 or 3 days or whatever else it is, but or you're feeling dizzy or giddy. But the objective of Viva Valet is, can we get them to habitually use it? Can we make it fun enough and engaging enough that they actually want to go to their phone and open it? Because what's the point of a tracker if it's so cumbersome that you're never actually going to use it,
Yes.
right? So for us, the bar more than valid information is usability. And will they return to it? We even consider putting jokes in there where you have to come back at the end of the day to get the answer, right? Like read the joke in the morning and come back and see, or this or that, because we want you to check in with yourself. And And what a lot of medical device companies, not that they don't appreciate it, but how an older person is actually feeling is often a greater signal than what, they might have high or low blood pressure, but they feel great, or they feel terrible, but all their vitals are fine. How they feel actually is really impactful.
Right.
I know we
So
don't think about it a lot, do we?
no, no. And I think what you said there has a lot of truth. We are sometimes we could be, going overboard with designing for utility. We're not considering the delight.
Yeah, absolutely. And for older people, it's really important, right? Because we want them to grow their confidence with technology.
Right. And Mariam, one thing that like I told you about the story about how my AI talk ended up being, a question about accessibility on, something that is so accessible to the rest of the population, the younger population, but not to the older population. So and also Viva Valley has inspired us to start using AI. And Stampede is using AI right now to in a way to role play as an older person so that we can watch and be more considerate in case if we're showing bias, in case if we're asking leading question. And sometimes now we're actually testing our interview scripts against this role-playing AI. We love it. It makes us feel
I
like,
would love to learn about it. I would love on a different moment. I'd
yeah,
love for you to teach us.
yeah. And I also mentioned this to Vishwas, just our project manager last week, about how, there's always this difficulty in try to adopt the right tone and clarity in micro copies on the app. And I was saying to Vishwas, like, hey, you know what? Why don't we train, ChatGPT enough to think and to role play as an older person? And then, we test all form of copywriting that we have in order to check whether for clarity, for familiarity, and all those traits that we feel is important for Viva Valet. And I think Vishwas is a big AI geek as well. So we are getting into conversations there. But I think I continue to think that engaging with the real user while frequent is a gift. And the reason why we use AI before we engage with the real user is because we want to be thorough, we want to be thoughtful as possible with the gift of time and space that our user gave us. Mariam, how do you foresee emerging technologies like AI contribute to Viva Valley's future services in order to meet these evolving needs of seniors, in which, one of them will be us soon?
I think honestly, we thought about this a lot. We thought about this concept in inception, and where we really see it, we think there is such incredible technology that's been developed. Even when you think of something like Alexa, right? Or even like a Siri, not a companion per se, but when we looked at what was critically challenging for older adults, it was keeping track of things,
Mm.
right? So if Viva Ballet were to implement it, where we look for it actually is in our symptom tracker, where somebody could just ask the question like, oh, you had knee pain yesterday. How's your knee feeling today? And just to record the data to be able to then send it to the doctor, right? Oh, did you have your meal today? Right? It's to ask the questions and answer them as an assistant to get throughout the day is really where we would like to use it and what we're developing out for a desktop symptom tracker, right? So it's really like a home assistant, if you will, that's really tracking how you feel. It could be tracking your notes for the day too, but again, in a very friendly way that is customized to you and your habits, that can remember when do you normally wake up, to go, hey, I haven't talked to you this morning. Wonder if they left, or wonder, and maybe if something's unusual, then they can trigger a phone call to
Right.
say, hey, there's some unfamiliar patterns here. I'm used to getting a check-in, or 3 days I've gotten missed meals or missed medication, right? So there's really exciting things that we're developing out in that space too, that we feel is again critical to the vision of keeping seniors empowered and wanting to live in their own home for as long as possible. Now, I will tell you that even in like when you look at the different devices that encompass this type of assistant AI, and again, Alexis comes to mind right off the bat because I just recently used it. Google Home is another one. Siri is another one. And when Shamsuddin had his stroke and he lost a lot of vision, right? He used to love reading newspaper articles, like the online political, all this stuff. And now he couldn't anymore on his phone. or on his iPad. Like his eyes just couldn't see it anymore. And so everything that he was used to in his day-to-day life, we couldn't do. Right. And he couldn't use the remote control anymore. And so he started to get extremely depressed around like, well, what can I do? He's used to feeding his information with news. And for each older person, what is their day-to-day life and their day-to-day routine that keeps them autonomous and independent and keep going is completely different. But for my particular husband, it was access to news and communicating to friends via text, which he cannot do. So I've had to teach him voice memos, right? So it's still a learning process because it's hard to get onto WhatsApp and to find the right name of the person, but he can hear the voice memos and then he can contribute by to speaking the voice memos, right? What I found interesting was as I bought all these devices like the Amazon, the Alexa, was that they do a really good job in having the AI there that's smart and intuitive and funny, but it's not gone far enough to bridging the gap of what did the older lose? Like they had a stroke, what did they lose?
Right.
How do we bridge that gap? So for my husband, it would be nice to say, hey, Alexa, read me whatever Malaysia news and have it be able to find that. Right. For somebody else, it might be access to their TV show. Hey, let's just turn on my TV and let me watch TV. And I mean, I'm putting a lot on just Amazon, but whatever these AI technologies are, for me, it seems like if you really care about to be in the space of somebody who's aging, it can't just be the AI that is friendly and helpful because they want to order more stuff from you, right? It's how do we bridge whatever they're losing? So we talk about aging at Viva Valet, we talk about it like you and I might be at, let's be really kind to ourselves and say 95% of our capacity, right? And as we age, we lose capacity. Now, for some people, that might be joint capacity. For some people, it might be cellular. For some people, it might be them losing, heart function. For some people, it might be cognitive. For everybody, it's very different. But what we teach our service partners is how do we identify it? And how do you bridge the gap? How do we make up the 20% or the 30% or the 40% so they still feel like they're operating as close to 100 as possible, right? Like that's our service philosophy in training with service with understanding. So to the extent that AI, I would offer the same question. How do you bridge the gap of what that individual is losing as they stage into different parts of aging that will make them feel as complete as possible to make as many decisions as they can for themselves?
Yes. So this, what I'm hearing is, you're looking at personalization, not in terms of, how can we help you, purchase or buy something on time, on demand, but it's really like, how do we personalize this enough so we can meet you where you need us to meet you?
Correct. So to keep you whole and vibrant and stimulated, right?
Yes.
So again, I think people are building AI tools as they should for their own companies to enhance what that critical thing is. So for example, right now, Viva Valet offers services. I'm not going to build AI just so they can order more services.
Exactly.
Build AI so they are confident older living in their home. And if they need services, they can order services.
Yes.
I think that's kind of where I'm getting with this. Is that's where I'd love to see people make strides in AI.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I love that you guys are using it. And we would love to see how we can use it more and maybe just create some personas, right?
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
other people could use in this template that we're doing.
Hmm.
So as I know we have to wind down here a little bit, I wanted to ask a closing question to you. And that was, if you were to give one piece of advice to all the generations of designers and developers about designing older, about really designing with the gaze of the generations that are older than them, right? Really focused on that, what would it be?
I can think of, well, you asked me for one piece, but as you know, I rarely stop at one.
That's fine.
So design with them. This is a philosophy that really underlines everything at Viva Ballet. Design with them, co-create with them, involve them, ask them questions and listen closely to the answer. They have so much unique insights. They have so much wisdom that will help you build services that would empower them and give them confidence or help them find back that confidence that they lost. So that will create honest dialogue, that thoughtful engagement. It will reveal their needs and challenges to you in so much more ways than you can gain in your own through your own experiences and your own lifetime. And so that's designing with them, no brainer. That But sometimes with designers and developers, we tend to stop at the utility side of experience. I mentioned about this earlier just now. We could take care of the features, we could take care of the accessibility, but we that is not where we should stop. So we should always seek for ways to bring delight as well in the experience. So think of comfortable design, personalized design that meets the user where they need us to meet them. Think about storytelling. There was one time, Mariam, you shared with us a hypothetical Alexa video where Alexa is very, very tailored to speak with the oldest. So Alexa is adding or adding all these small nice gestures that uh, it became more conversational because sometimes like aging is a lonely experience. Um so the technology should consider like meeting the user where they are, and consider storytelling and even celebratory feedback, like say, hey, good job, like that was really like you you have managed to figure out this piece of the technology. Would you like, but not just stop there, don't just congratulate them, but then ask them like, would you want to try more, like give them that option. I think those are all very small but compounding ways. That's the thoughts that keep coming back to my mind. You don't want to do one big gestures. What you want is you want to add this small, small, small delight points. They all compound in a way that can create moments of joy, surprise, and familiarity. And at the end of the day, if we're lucky, Mariam, I feel like if we do this right, we will get to be the users of the experience
Yeah,
we create today. That's
yeah.
all I'm doing. This is my
Very,
retirement plan.
this is a very approachable technology, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
approachable technology. Oh, that's
And
very
on your side, when once that since you have been reflecting on this collaborative journey, how do you see what you have done so far help Viva Valley play a pivotal role in shaping the future of tech-enabled care for seniors?
Oh, wow. I think we as Viva Valet have to continue to be loud and unapologetic, right? In speaking and hoping that we are honoring people that are older than us in their journey and getting it right. I think it's become very clear to us that anybody we work with has to wear the hat of learning and understanding, which is one of our values, because we say all the time, hey, we're not going to get it all right because we're not in that space. So we give ourselves permission to say, whoop, we got that wrong, and let's adjust, right? We don't double down and be like, well, no, we were trying to do this. No, we don't. It's either working for our users or it's not. It's either working for older or it's not. But it's really about being open and understanding and learning. And I think that's what we hope to spread, is to say, you know, this aging population, it's valuable. We are that aging population. Everybody is an aging population. It's the reality of life. And if you if you refuse, people always go, oh, let's build this for future generations. No, let's build it for ourselves. Okay, let's build it for ourselves. And the past generation that laid down this presence for us, they paved the road. It's the people that are older now that have paved the road to the internet for us, to all these tools that we're using today. And we're just gonna like, nah, thank you for your contribution, goodbye. Like we keep thinking about the future we're leaving behind. What about the future that is somebody else's present today, right? For these older adults that inevitably we will become them. Any energy here will not be wasted. Will not be wasted. So it is kind of a selfish journey,
It
right?
is.
People can remember that like we are doing something great, but we are not a charity. Like this is extremely personal. And those are we hope that we can say the uncomfortable things
Mm.
very candidly, right? We hope we can just say, hey, you're forgetting about old people. We call them olders, as we've learned that in our ethnography what they prefer to be called, of all the words we put out there, quite frankly, they didn't care. They're not so delicate as our generation is that's approaching getting older. We're very delicate
Yes.
about the idea of aging. People that are aged are very proud to be the ages that they are. They're not delicate. Okay. But so the term that they came up with that they all agreed on was not dead yet. Just to give everybody an idea of what 85-year-olds want to be called, or 80-year-olds, they want to be called not dead yet. So they don't care, senior, elder, older. These are issues we have.
Right.
Okay. Middle-aged, right? This is what we have. This is our problem. But I
Mariam,
think,
it has
yeah.
been, yeah, go ahead.
No, I said I hope we have to do it together. There's no Viva Valet is going to get nowhere standing on a soapbox in the middle of a forest. So
For all it's worth, I don't think you have ever been not loud on and also not unapologetic. Yes. So yeah, so I think you are really the embodiment of Viva Valley, and it has been such an inspiring conversation today. We could go on and on, seriously, and reflecting on the journey, planning, the future of this journey. And I'm so thankful to your time and your passion and and all the exciting things that you're doing in this space. It's hard. It's really hard, doing this, but also at the same time, it's very personal. You're right. I
personal,
completely
and
agree.
we thank Shaza, I think you particularly, and I think Stampede and all the resource that you guys have put in the time, that I know that we can call you and I feel like something's not quite right, to come and have a look at it again and say, are we staying true to what we said we were going to build? And you're always on board and we say, hey, we want to test it again, and let's grab some users and let's educate some people on how to do this. And you've always been very extremely willing and gracious, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Back to you. I'm learning, and I'm learning so much because of you as well. Thank you so much, Mariam.
Thank you. Thank you.